Hello, welcome to the presentation for How to Study for Economics from the Learning Center. My name is Elena Wadsworth and I'm an academic coach.
I'm Patrick Jonathan and I'm the tutor.
So kind of before we get into some study strategies for economics, we'll give you just a brief overview of the Learning Center and kind of all the resources that we have for you. So to start, we have on-campus tutoring, which is what Patrick does. Then we have online tutoring, which is also kind of what we're doing now in this remote time. We have Road to Success presentations that are very similar to this about different study skills, time management, all sorts of things like that. Some college success courses available on D2L, and academic coaching, which is what I do. So the objectives of this workshop are to hopefully teach you to understand the importance of the study cycle in relation to your learning, identify specific active learning strategies that are applicable to your area of study, which in this case is economics, and that you leave feeling prepared to apply these strategies that we talk about today to your own coursework. So here's a brief overview of the study cycle that we'll be talking about. And you can see it's kind of a cyclical cycle, as is the nature of a cycle. So step 1 is preview, step 2 is attend, step 3 review, step 4 study, and step 5 assess. And then that all loops together. So we'll kind of go through each stage to show how they all build upon each other to kind of build some successful study skills. So the first step, preview, is that you should pre-read material before your class, and especially even if you have an asynchronous class, before you're going to watch that remote presentation and review those materials. And that can include skimming the chapter, reviewing summaries and chapter objectives, and taking the time to write down questions that you want answered before class starts, because it can happen so frequently that you're in class and busy taking notes or trying to track what they're talking about that you can forget to ask those questions. So it's really helpful to have those ready in advance, as well as check your syllabus to see what material will be covered that week in class, and if there's any upcoming weeks, like an essay due maybe the week after, that you want to ask about. And why is it important to do all this? You'll be so much better prepared to learn new concepts when they come up if you've already been introduced to them in your brain, and you'll be ready to absorb that information.
So how does this look like for economics? So you have to make sure that you do all the homework and exercise ahead of time, like how Elena said that we have to have some questions prepared for class and write them down so that during class time, if you have a Zoom class where you could ask a question, you could ask it to your professor, or if not, you could email your professor. Remember, you could always email your professor. Many students forget that they could email the professor. And that's one of the best way to just understand the homework better or the exercise. And if you're stuck on a question, always try to look it up in Google or any search engine that you like, because usually they have good explanation. And although maybe it might not answer entirely, I think it might help guide the missing pieces that you've missed during your studies.
Absolutely. And so the next step, attend your classes. And especially whether that's, in person or remote, our things are today, go to class and ask questions, participate in discussions and activities. And you'll find that the more engaged you are in class through active listening, active questioning, and engaging with your peers, the more you're going to get out of class. And especially we recognize that remote learning is really hard to stay engaged, and it's kind of its own unique challenge. So just some suggestions are turning your camera on. It's really easy if you have your camera off to kind of tune out, get too comfortable, get too sleepy, and then you're not probably paying attention as well as you could have. And choose speaker view to stay engaged, because in grid view, it can be really distracting seeing all the different faces. So choose speaker view as if it's a regular class where you can focus on your teacher, and use, chat functions and raise your hand to ask questions, especially if you're afraid to maybe ask questions verbally, still send that in the chat. And so again, why is this important? It can be really hard to stay engaged over Zoom, but still finding ways to actively engage with material and engage with class, even in a remote context, will really help your retention of material.
So when attending the classes, try to work through the graphing problems with your professor or any math problems so that when it's your time to do it, your homework or the upcoming exam where you have to do it yourself, you could do it because, I think later on we're going to learn about learning styles. Some of the learning style might be writing. And if you're good with writing, then it would help you doing your homework. And when you're doing it with your professor, it would help be a good example or reference to when doing your homework by yourself. And always have scratch paper near you or just a book so that if you find something interesting or something that you might have forgotten to ask your professor and it's answered by the professor, you can just write it down, just jot it out.
Mhm. And so then after class, the next stage is to review. And we suggest try to review the material within 24 hours because we'll kind of talk about it later, but there's a forgetting curve of the longer you wait to review that material, the more likely you are to forget what was just talked about, no matter how engaged you were. And so it doesn't have to be a really long review process, but taking the time to just reread your notes, reread your work, and then identify if there are any gaps in comprehension, if there was anything that was confusing in the lecture that you still didn't get from your notes, and make note of those lingering questions so you can follow up and ask them. As well, when you're reviewing kind of how much you're able to retain from that session, think about what learning style you have and consider a note-taking system that will work well for you. And so why do all this? Studies show that reviewing notes within a few hours after classes considerably increases retention and understanding. So as I was talking about, here's a graph of the typical forgetting curve for newly learned information. And so you can see that the first day, first moment, you've got 100% of information, but that's a pretty steep curve down of how quickly you're going to forget that. And then if you review it the next day, you can pretty easily remember that information. And reviewing it consistently and incrementally, you can see the steepness, the slope of those curves becomes less and less steep, and you're able to retain more and more over time through consistent study, but also kind of frequent study as well. So, as we were mentioning earlier, knowing your learning style, you might be wondering what that is or how to figure that out. These are kind of some main types of learning styles. So, one is visual graphic. When we talk about a visual learner, this is usually what they mean, in which you draw out concepts. You might use a whiteboard system. You'll synthesize info into symbols and images. And so, that could be that you really like colors, you like circles and graphs, and you like to arrange information. And that's the way that your brain helps retain it. If you're a visual text learner, that's really reading and writing, using lists, rewriting ideas and concepts, and creating answering test questions. So very similar to kind of textbook study and those sorts of things. Auditory could be talking through materials, even if that's reading it aloud to yourself, using text-to-speech features online to have your textbooks read to you, giving yourself a mini lecture. And if this is the case that you are an auditory learner, it could be great if your classes are recorded to consider not taking notes actually while you're attending that lecture and just fully being present and listening if that's your learning style, and then later going back to read that information. And then if you're a kinesthetic learner, meaning you're really active and you need to engage your senses and be kind of tactile, figure out ways to make it personal and be active. So even if that's standing at a standing desk, using a fidget, even a fidget spinner, like doodling in a way that's not distracting, but keeping yourself engaged. And so here are 3 examples of different note-taking strategies kind of based off of those learning styles. And so you can see the example on the far right is just kind of your classic like reading, writing learner where it's lists, it's organized, and that makes sense of kind of how that person's brain can work. The far left is more graphical where it needs to be organized into categories, there's sections and it's visually distinct. And the center one is really a graphic, creative, artistic learning that colors help make things distinct, mapping, seeing how things interrelate. And so even that can kind of give you a starting point to see which really resonates with you and which would help you study and retain information.
For economics, I would recommend just doing your homework as much as possible with your notes. So knowing all the different learning styles, maybe if you're auditory, you could um, uh, play it again, replay the recording, and just do it while doing your homework. Or if you're kinesthetic, you could see the example that you did in class with your professor. And by doing so, you would, for me personally, I'm somewhat kinesthetic. So when I can write things out, I can kind of like rewrite the same thing again and understand it better. And just do it as much as possible. And like the previous tip, I would recommend just Googling it if you already reach your maximum potential and you do not know where else to go. You can Google it and email your professor at the same time, or schedule a meeting with me, the economic tutor, and we can go through it together. And hopefully, I can help you.
Mhm. Yeah, and so the next step, studying, getting into the bulk of it. And so we'll kind of talk about, again, trying to get into active study strategies rather than passive study strategies. And so passive is when you're just kind of going through, maybe you're reading, but you're not engaging in any of those other ways, and you're not a visual text learner, and so you're not absorbing it. So really being active and intentional. And in active learning, repetition is key. and finding out ways to engage with that information through taking practice tests, creating your own study guide, using existing ones, and engaging with others. And so like Patrick was saying, you don't need to study alone. Form groups with your classmates or check in with your professor and make use of TAs and tutors that are there to help you and can be really great in the fact that they can actually walk through the steps of the homework with you. So that's a really amazing resource. And so why is all that important? Because exams are so focused on output and your ability to retain that information, but also communicate it. So if you're only passive learning and maybe you've spent a few hours reading, but you didn't take the time to check in to see if you can communicate that back to someone else for your understanding, that can be a real bummer and show up when you're taking the test if you can't communicate that. So engaging in multiple types of study strategies is a good way to check your comprehension. So when thinking about active study strategies a little bit more, to start passive on the opposite end, like I was saying, could just be reading, listening to a lecture, watching a video, and that's kind of where it ends. But then active study strategies are focused on output rather than just input. And so that is taking those practice tests, could be creating note cards and flashcards, could be color coding different terms, and it could be studying with friends or a tutor in which you're communicating with other folks.
And just applying all the things that you've learned, I would encourage you to ask as many questions as possible during class so you could clarify any confusions that you might have or just anything that you don't understand fully. And try to always have a study partner or group because sometimes the question might not come from you but from your friend. And based on my experience when I'm teaching someone, as right now I'm a tutor, I actually learn more because when I teach someone I really understand what I'm talking about. And even at things that I don't really understand, when I try to explain it to someone, somehow it makes it more clear in my mind also. So I would just recommend having a group and tackle a problem together.
Awesome. And so then after you've taken that time to study, it's important to assess and double check that it did work for you and work for your learning style. So check in with yourself, see what's working and what could be changed or improved. And one way to do that is just taking practice tests and quizzes and seeing if you're getting grades that you want on those, if you're not meeting a grade that you would want, if you spent a lot of time but feel like you don't remember it, that could be a sign that your learning style or the strategy you've been taking didn't quite work for you. As well as organize your study time and reflect on your system for self-management and consider both your learning style, but also how you're structuring those study sessions. And why is this important to do? Because when you check in with yourself, we're able to recognize our strengths and also our growth areas, and organizing your time can really help reduce stress and keep you on track to achieve your goals. So in structuring a study session, we have this kind of general suggestion of how much time you should be taking when you're doing that. And just to start, just set a goal. That takes 1 to 2 minutes. But before you just start reading and can get kind of lost in whatever the assignment is, decide what you want to accomplish in the study session and recognize also how many pages or chapters are there and how many problems do I need to do. Next step, study and just focus. Commit to, I'm going to either spend 30 minutes, 50 minutes, but no, like I'm going to turn my phone off. I'm going to take away distractions and I'm going to really engage with this material and I'm going to do some active study skills. And then take a break. Reward yourself. And this isn't a long break, but it could just be 10 to 15 minutes. Go for a walk, grab a snack, but let your brain stop focusing, distract. And then afterwards, come back and review for 5 minutes and go over what you studied. Return to your goal. Did you accomplish that? Why or why not? Do you feel like you retained it? And then start again. And this is important so that you don't try to study for 3 hours straight and forget what you're doing, but really actively learning, reward yourself and can continue this cycle and something that feels really manageable for you.
I would really recommend for economics because it's more of a language problem, I would say, than a math problem because it actually uses really simple math. But if you don't understand the question, then you would not be able to even answer it, right? So before trying to tackle the problem, understand what the question is asking for, whether the graph, how it looks, and just designate a time every single day or every other day to learn because it would help you retain it. And by just repetition, like repetition is key, by repeating the same problem or similar problem, I can guarantee that it would boost your exam grade and help you in your homework.
And so after hearing all this, if you would like some more support, feel free to meet with us as an academic coach or a tutor. And we're really here to help you. And so Patrick can speak more to the tutoring side, but on the coaching side, we kind of help with broader picture, help you identify goals and needs for self-management, general study strategies, motivation, more. And you can see that on our online bio. Patrick, do you want to tell a little bit about tutoring?
For tutoring, we could help most of things. We can help you guys like homework. We're able to help. We're not allowed to help for quizzes or take home exams,
Mhm.
but we could still help with some of the, maybe you have vocabulary problem, like you do not even understand what the question's asking for. We can try to make like a substitute problem. It's a similar problem, not the same, but then it would help you understand the question better, and just give it a try. You should download the Penji app because we use Penji for our appointments. And from there, I think it's pretty clear. Hopefully, it's pretty clear. If it's not clear, then you can let one of the people in the learning center know, and I think they can help guide you.
And if you have any questions, please feel free and reach out, send us an email, reach out to the Learning Center and get connected to a coach or tutor as well.